Well, that was one of the most chaotic and emotional and distressing finishes to a F1 race I have ever seen in my life. And yet again, Formula 1 proves that despite a overall kind of mediocre race at best, you can just never stop watching right up until the end, because in this crazy season, in this crazy sport in 2020, expect the unexpected, and certainly that is exactly what we got in the final laps of the 2020 British Grand Prix. Now, before we do jump into the video, don't forget guys, if you do enjoy the content on my channel, then don't forget to drop a like, smash that subscribe button, that would be greatly appreciated, and don't forget to check out my social medias. Instagram and Twitter will be above, but guys, let's get into this one. Now, first of all, to really keep it real with you guys, let's be honest, the entirety of that race was not exactly an all-time classic, as good as the last couple of laps were, and although there were some intriguing incidents at the start of the race and the two safety cars certainly kind of threw something into the works with some early pit stops that kind of almost led to the ridiculously chaotic end to the race that we had, I definitely think that the majority, the middle portion of that race from like lap 15 all the way up until like lap 48, 49 was just mediocre at best, and quite honestly, there was barely even a DRS train to watch. It was so difficult to overtake, and we literally got barely any good overtakes that as you watch. So yeah, it was a really mediocre kind of middle part to the race, and I was honestly getting like France 2019 vibes of just nothing happening. But then the race just exploded into life. It was so emotional, so heart-pounding right towards the end. And to be honest guys, as bad and kind of boring that the first part and the middle part of the race was, I think it was all worth it to stay towards the end and watch some of the greatest final laps of a race in the history of Formula 1. So yeah, let's get into some of the big highlights actually before we got to the crazy finish. Now, the first really big talking point to talk about was the first kind of big incident during the race that brought out the first safety car, and that was the collision between Kmag and Alexander Alban. Now, the stewards deemed that it was mostly Alexander Alban's fault and gave him a 5-second penalty, which he then served during one of his pit stops. Now, in my opinion, I understand why they would give that 5-second penalty, although to me, I think it was more of a racing incident, because I don't think Alexander Alban was predominantly or 100% at fault, and to me it was more of a racing incident because as much as that gap was always going to close, he did have his car halfway on the inside of Kevin Magnussen, and although that corner isn't exactly an orthodox kind of corner to overtake, again, Kmag made a mistake on the curb. He had a very bad exit, and it was just one of those things. So yeah, I understand why Alex was given a 5-second penalty, but to me it was more of a racing incident. But more than the collision, more than anything, it just compounded a poor weekend for Alexander Alban again. And although he was a little bit stronger in the race and certainly towards the end, and he did finish in the points, yeah, it was just another disappointing weekend from Alexander Alban. And during a weekend where there's been a lot of reshuffling behind the scenes to get Alex more experienced engineers, he got a different race engineer, so there are things that are being changed to try and help Alex a little bit more, but he needs to just ignore what the media are saying, try and ignore some of the pressure, even though of course it is very difficult, and ignore what Max Verstappen is doing as well, and just get to grips with the car, use the experienced staff around you, and just really try and find more one-lap pace, because I really think that is where his downfall is at the moment. But again, a poor weekend no doubt, but hopefully he'll be able to bounce back next time out. Now, I don't think that all of the crashes and the safety cars and the tyre delaminations were just the absolute be-all and end-all of this race. I do think that there was some decent pieces and pockets of racing throughout the entire race because, you know, although it was difficult to overtake and we saw the likes of Daniel Ricciardo struggle against Romain Grosjean on old tyres, we saw, of course, Esteban Ocon as well struggle to get past Lance Stroll, and which is really strange actually because Silverstone is actually usually quite a good track when it comes to overtaking. It's not a street circuit, it's not a really narrow circuit, it's one of the old school kind of wider tracks, and yeah, it was just a little bit strange to see so many cars struggling to overtake, but nevertheless we did get to see some really nice pockets of overtaking, some nice quality racing, and also some pretty hairy moments as well. I mean, if you remember, of course, Daniel Ricciardo and Romain Grosjean. I mean, I love Romain Grosjean because he just always stick to his guns, even though there were some pretty questionable, very late moves going on there. But there was also some really quality racing, like between the two McLaren teammates, Lando Norris and Carlos Sainz, it getting very, very close between those two, and also between Sainz, Norris and Daniel Ricciardo as well. So I think it just highlights once again the most exciting probably part of Formula 1 in 2020 is that midfield battle between the likes of Racing Point, Renault and McLaren as well. And I think once again that will be kind of the biggest exciting thing to watch in 2020. However, let's be honest guys, this race is going to be remembered mostly for the final couple of laps, the last 2 or 3 laps where it just absolutely got turned on its head. Now, a lot of people are comparing this year to what happened at Silverstone in 2013. Now, although there are similarities, I think they're very different because in 2013, I think it was mostly down to the curbs, and also it was happening to people at various points throughout their stint. It wasn't like it was this year where, if you kind of exclude Neewer, we mostly saw these tyre failures right at the end of the race, right when the tyres were pretty much dropping off, and also at that kind of limit where Pirelli said, you know, the hard tyre, it can probably do about 40 laps. And yes, we had some safety cars which were obviously going to extend the stints, but they were right on the edge. So although Pirelli will have some investigating to do and some questions to answer, they did say that the hard tyre could probably do about 40 laps, and the drivers, as they usually do, just took it beyond the limit, I think. And it was just one of those things, and especially at a circuit like Silverstone, I mean, Silverstone is one of the quickest circuits on the calendar. It's a really old school track, and it's one of the most abrasive as well because of the speeds that they're doing, especially with these modern cars. So I think it almost compounds the problem, and that is why we saw so many tyre failures, especially towards the end, especially when the drivers were just trying to eke out the last of their tyres. And we saw people like Kimi Raikkonen have a tyre failure, Carlos Sainz, then Valtteri Bottas, and then the big one and the most dramatic one, which was Lewis Hamilton as well. And although Lewis's wasn't dramatic in the sense that it was a massive tyre failure, it was when it happened, you know, on the final lap after a third of the lap was completed. He was around Brooklands corner when it really kind of let go, and he did the last 2/3 of the lap on basically 3 wheels whilst being chased by Max Verstappen, and it definitely gave one of the most dramatic ends to the race ever. There was a little bit of confusion actually, especially if you watched on Sky, whether it was Lewis Hamilton or Valtteri Bottas, because yeah, it got a little bit confusing with the commentary. But once we knew it was Lewis Hamilton, once we knew he was on the final lap, and because we knew Max Verstappen had pitted, yeah, my heart, and many people as well, because I've talked to a lot of fans that said the same thing, my heart was pounding like crazy. I didn't know what to expect. You know, was Lewis Hamilton gonna make it on 3 wheels? Was Max Verstappen gonna chase him down on fresh tires and get an unlikely win at Silverstone? I mean, it was just such an incredible finish to such a boring race, to be honest, and it was all worth it right towards the end. And it was just amazing to see Lewis Hamilton kind of, you know, race on 3 wheels and almost just dragging his car to the finish. You can see Max Verstappen in the background just chasing Lewis down on those fresh tires, but in the end, Lewis, just by the skin of his teeth, in the end it was actually a 5-second gap, but had the finish line been maybe 100 or 200 meters down the road, I'm not sure if he would have made it. So yeah, in the end, Lewis did manage to hold on to the win just, but yeah, Max Verstappen almost got that win right at the end. Now, post-race, there was a lot of talk about the Red Bull decision to pit Max Verstappen. Now, you know, it's clearly divided a lot of opinion over on Twitter, certainly. In my opinion, yes, in hindsight, obviously they should not have pitted Max Verstappen. And if you look at the way the race panned out, Max would have actually finished with a pretty comfortable gap, probably would have won it by 20-30 seconds. However, at the time, something that Christian Horner revealed actually after the race was that Verstappen had his own tyre issues. You know, he had his own vibration. The front left was also pretty poor on Max Verstappen's car. So when you kind of look at Red Bull from their position, they have Valtteri Bottas, who's just obviously kind of gone out of the picture with his tyre delamination, and they have second place. What's the point of risking it? Just pit Max Verstappen, know that he's going to get to the finish, and maybe even go for fastest lap as well, get that extra point, or you can chase down Lewis Hamilton. However, at the time, with about 2 or 3 laps to go, Lewis Hamilton was still over 10 seconds ahead of Max Verstappen, and even though Lewis was suffering on his tyres, you know, I always thought, you know, from a Red Bull perspective, Lewis, you know, even if he drives at like 2 or 3 seconds a lap slower, he's still going to finish ahead of Max Verstappen. So to me, it kind of, you know, I never considered that Max would ever catch Lewis, despite even if he closed him again at a rate of 2 or 3 seconds a lap, because Lewis had over 10 seconds of advantage in the space of about 2 laps to go. So yeah, I think they just did the safe thing of pitting him, getting him, you know, to try and get him to get fastest lap, and then they obviously saw that Lewis Hamilton had his tyre failure, and then they obviously just egging him on to try and catch him towards the end. But that's the thing about luck in Formula 1. Sometimes you get it and sometimes you don't. If you remember, of course, very famously, and in Max Verstappen's case, he did the same thing and got punished as well. So yeah, luck is just never on your side. But in the end, I think Max, you know, he should be really proud with P2. I mean, he was also just a league in his own. Maybe not, you know, in terms of like, you know, winning the race, but he was way ahead of the Ferrari of Charles Leclerc, and also a good 10-15 seconds behind the Mercedes as well. And, you know, he got bored halfway through the race asking his engineer if he's had a drink or not. So you can see that Max is frustrated. He knows he has the pace. He knows he has the talent to fight with the Mercedes, but Red Bull still have not given him a good enough car. So yeah, once again, I think Red Bull just did the safe thing. I totally understand, you know, it's easy to say now, of course, why did they pit him? He could have won the race, but I understand that his tires were graining. He wasn't really going to catch Hamilton if Hamilton didn't have the delamination. So yeah, I don't really blame Red Bull, and I think overall, I think Max should be very, very proud of a very good race, and finishing in P2, that is a very good result for him. So yeah, that is my thoughts on the last 2 or 3 amazing laps at the British Grand Prix. Now, in summary, it was a great performance by Mercedes, minus the whole tyre saga. They just looked on a different planet. Only Max Verstappen could barely keep up with them, which just obviously, you know, tells you how good Max is, but the rest of the field were just completely left behind. There were some really good low-key performances, like Charles Leclerc getting on the podium in that Ferrari, and also Pierre Gasly. Big shout out to Pierre Gasly. He had an amazing performance, but there were also quite a few teams and drivers who I think will be very disappointed. I think Racing Point and Lance Stroll. Lance really ran out of tyres towards the end of the race, and when you consider who his teammate is, you know, Sergio Perez, a guy who is famous for preserving his tyres and being able to drive the wheels off a car even when there is no tyres, I think he could have had a very big result this weekend, so they definitely missed him more than ever. And then of course, as far as Nico Hülkenberg, it just when it rains it pours for Racing Point, doesn't it? Sadly, it was the return that wasn't, but hopefully we do see him next time out at the 70th anniversary Grand Prix. Anyway guys, there you go. That is my video looking at the last 2 or 3 laps and the British Grand Prix as a whole. Now let me know what you guys thought in the comments below. I cannot wait to see what you guys thought about just the race in general, some of the overtaking or lack of overtaking, and of course that dramatic finish as well. Anyway, I hope you did enjoy this video, and if you did, don't forget to drop a like, smash that subscribe button, and don't forget to check out my social medias. Instagram and Twitter will be above, and guys, I'll see you in the next one. Bye guys.